no fusion of subject and object, this and that, self and not self, which means an eternal quarrel between the two, and consequently eternal unrest. When emptiness, no birth, and non-substantiality are accepted, non-duality or non-multiplicity must be recognized as true also. All these are related ideas. In the Sagathakam we have no birth and suchness, ultimate limit of reality and emptiness. All these are different names for one thing. Do not wrongly discriminate and regard them as non-existent. As in the world Hasti is also called Kara, and Indra is also called Sakra or Purandara, so with all things there are many names for one and the same thing. Do not wrongly discriminate and regard them as non-existent. Form and emptiness are not different, nor does no birth differ. Do not wrongly discriminate. All erroneous views arise from asserting difference. Suchness means no birth. The Buddhist conception of immortality. Relatively speaking, no birth implies no death. And when the Mahayana philosopher declares that existence has the nature of no birth, does he mean that the world as it stands is immortal and not subject to the law of causation? How does this view vary from that of the other Indian philosophers who uphold the hypothesis of a creator and his immortality? In short, in what respect does Buddhist immortality differ from other forms of immortality? This was the question proposed by Mahamedi, who puts it in the following form. The doctrine of immortality advocated by the Blessed One seems to me not different in any way from that of all the philosophers. For the latter two talk about the immortality of the causal agencies as much as the Blessed One himself, who affirms the immortality of space, apratisamkhyanara, and nirvana. The philosophers explain the rise of the world from a creator and the law of causality, while the Blessed One too explains it as caused by ignorance, desire, and karma. Both uphold causality, the difference being in name only. This also applies to external objects which are conditioned externally. Seeing this, there is no difference between the views held by the Blessed One and those of the philosophers. The latter have atoms, primary germ, Isvara, Lord of creation, etc., and assume the immortality of these 9 objects. Whereas the Blessed One says that all things are neither born nor pass away, to which the categories of being and non-being do not apply. And then the elements are not destructible. Their self-nature is neither born nor passes away. Moving through the various paths of existence, they retain their self-identity. Though the discrimination upheld by thee is somewhat different, all is recognized by the philosophers. For this reason, thou hast shown no deviation from the doctrine of the philosophers. If there is anything in thy doctrine distinguishing it from theirs, pray tell me. As far as the conception of immortality is concerned, thine and theirs do not betray any dissimilitude. According to the Buddha, many Tathagatas do not appear in the world at one time and at one place. If the philosophers make the same assertions as the Buddha himself, we must say that there are more than one Tathagata. This was the way Mahamedi presented his doubt as to the sameness of the Buddhist position with that of their opponents. In the following, the Buddha attempts to define his doctrine against the so-called philosophers as regards the problem of immortality, or that of no birth and no passing away. O Mahamedi, my view is not the same as that of the philosophers, not only as regards immortality, but as regards birth and impermanency. Why? According to them, there is self-substance about which they assert immortality and unchangeability. My position is not that, for it does not fall into the categories of being and non-being. It goes beyond the categories of being and non-being, of birth and disappearance. It is not existence nor is it non-existence. How is it not non-existent? Because it is like unto a diversity of forms appearing in a dream or maya. How is it not existent? Because the self-substance of forms is not to be asserted as existent. We see them as appearances which are not realities, we grasp them as before us, yet they are not really graspable. For this reason, all existences are to be regarded neither as existent nor as non-existent. If we know that what we see before us is no more than the manifestation of our own mind and abide within ourselves where no dualistic discrimination takes place, we see that there is nothing astir in the world. The ignorant assert themselves in their doings, discriminate therein, but the wise do not. O Mahamedi, this is due to the discrimination of unrealities whereby the ignorant get altogether confused in their judgments. It is like the Gandharv's palace or magically created figures. O Mahamedi, it is like the child observing the various magic created tradespeople who appear going into the Gandharv's palace and again coming out of it. He imagines in his confused mind that all this is real and asserts to that effect. So it is with the ignorant who are confused in the judgment of birth and no birth, and of the created and of the uncreated. There is really no appearance, no disappearance of the magical figures, of which we can assert either as born or as past, because they are unpredicable as being or as non-being. The ignorant falsely assume birth and disappearance, but the wise do not. O Mahamedi, by being untruthful it is meant that the self-nature of things is not truthfully discerned as it is in itself. When however an untrue view prevails, there is an attachment to the self-substance of things, failing to see them in their solitary quietude, and as long as this quietude fails to be seen, there will be no disappearance of wrongful discrimination. Therefore, O Mahamedi, a view based on formlessness of things is superior to that based on form, because form is the cause of birth. When there is formlessness, it puts a stop to the rise of discrimination, and there is a state of immortality, which is nirvana. O Mahamedi, one finds nirvana where one sees the abode of reality in its truthful signification and abandons the discrimination of all that is mind and all that belongs to mind. Then there is the realization of supreme wisdom which lies in the inmost consciousness of the Tathagata. This I call the solitary and nirvana. No birth means transcending relativity, as is manifest throughout the Lankavatara. One of its main contests is that ignorance and consequently the state of always being in bondage is due to discrimination wrongfully made concerning the self-nature of existence. That is to say, because we are so addicted to the categories of being and non-being, birth and disappearance, creation and destruction, etc., which are the products of discrimination, we cannot look into the truth and reality of things. We must disentangle ourselves from this bondage of the so-called logical necessity of opposites and return to the primary experience if there be any such and see and interpret things from the knowledge revealed therein and thereby. By this primary experience which is not logical but issues from a discipline, existence is taken in its truthful signification. All the intellectual scaffoldings and constructions are thus done away with. And what is known as non-discriminative knowledge in Mahayana terminology shines out. And as a result we see that all things are unborn, uncreated, and never pass away, and that all appearances are like magically created figures, or like a dream, like shadows reflected on a screen of eternal solitude and tranquility. The Mahayanist eye is always gazing at the screen itself, but it will be conscious of the screen as long as it is discriminated from the shadows which in turn are themselves discriminations. This is not yet perfect attainment. The Lankavatara wants to go on further declaring that the screen of eternity too must be abolished. For it is only thus that ignorance is forever dispelled, leaving us perfectly free and unhampered in all our seeings and doings. When we come to this culmination of intellectual perspicuity we realize what is meant by all things being unborn and conform ourselves to the Anutpadikadharmakation ti. When the following gathas are seen in this light, the doctrine of no birth, no causality, etc., will grow quite intelligible, and, as the Prajnaparamita warns, will not frighten us any longer. 97. That all things are causelessly evolved, as they are not to be described in terms of relativity, such as being and non-being, discriminating and discriminated. This is what I call no birth. 98. The mind disengaged from objectivity and free from the twofold svabhava, the mind that is obtained by a revulsion at the basis of consciousness. This is what I call no birth. 99. It is no external existence, no non-existence, indeed, it is beyond the grasp of the mind and transcends all philosophical views. This is what is characterized as no birth. 100. All such terms as empty, having no self-substance, etc., are to be thus understood. We talk of being empty not because of emptiness but because of no birth. The idea is that the Buddhist doctrine of emptiness is not absolute annihilation but the denial of a relative world as final reality where birth and death actually take place. This, however, does not mean that there is behind this world of appearance something which contrasts with the former and which is what is really real as distinguished or discriminated from the phenomenal. According to the Mahayana, the outside world of form and name and the inner world of thought and feeling are both no more than the construction of mind. And when the mind ceases, the weaving out of a world of particulars is stopped. This stopping is called emptiness or no birth, but it is not the wiping out of existence. It is on the contrary viewing it truthfully unhampered by discriminative categories. Buddhism, therefore, upholds causation on the ground that things actually come into view and pass out of view. Only it rejects the view that causation has its first term, has started from a primary cause or causal agent which is a fixed final reality. The following is to be interpreted in this light. 101. There is a concatenation of causal chains, whereby things come into existence and pass out of it. If this linking is loosened, there will be no birth, no disappearance. 102. As soon as there is any loosening at all in the chain mutually conditioning, there will be no existence. Oneness and separateness are the ideas by which the philosophers discriminate causation. 10. There is nothing really born being, non-being, and the negation of both. There is only a concatenation in which one sees things coming into existence and passing out of it. 104. It is only owing to conventional ideas that we speak of a mutually linked chain of causation. When a dislocation takes place in the chain there is no birth, so-called, whatever. 105. As there is absence of birth, we call it no birth, in fact there is nothing but a continuity of chain. And thus we avoid the faults of the philosophers. The ignorant do not understand it. 106. Apart from concatenation there is nothing to be regarded as born. If one says there is, he commits a sin against the doctrine of causation. He is the destroyer of the causal chain. 107. If the causation chain is something external to things subject to it, like a lamp shining on a variety of things, there must be something somewhere which is known as chain, but altogether different from what it truly is. 108. Such things, if there be any, have no self-substance, are unborn, and are by nature like the sky. Such chains are realities that are different from true reality, they are what is cherished by the unwise. 109. There is another kind of birthlessness which is the truth itself realized by the wise. They abide in conformity with this unborn truth whose birth is what really constitutes no birth. 111. Lgnorance, hankering, working, etc. are internal causation chains. The tree, lump of clay, utensil, will, seeds, elements, and such like constitute an external chain. 112. Lf there is born anywhere anything outside these and yet determined by causation chain, this goes against the view which upholds causation only, and is not in accord with the right teaching. 113. If birth, so called, is really non-existent, whose intelligence is there that is chained to concatenation? But as far as our conventional senses go there is mutual conditioning and birth, and this is the reason for our maintaining the doctrine of causation-chain. 114. Such categories as heat, fluidity, motion, solidity, etc. are discriminated by the ignorant. Such are concatenations. They cannot be designated as categories, hence they have no self-substance. No birth, transcendental truth, and eternity unthinkable. We know that there are two positions usually taken up by the Mahayana thinker who attacks problems of ontology. Unless we know which of the two positions is being upheld by him at the moment, we shall find him quite frequently contradicting himself. The one is that of conventionalism, and the other, if we put it so, is a highly metaphysical one. If we designate the first as a relative position, we may call the latter the absolute one. From the relative or conventional point of view, the Mahayana admits that there is causation and the world moves on from one state to another in conformity with the law. But it refuses to give this continuance an absolute value, for it is real only as far as our senses are concerned. Conventionalism or naive realism does not after all give real satisfaction to the deeper demands of the religious consciousness. So the Buddhists ask us to go beyond this world of appearance where supposedly all births and deaths are objectively real. A realm beyond the senses, however, must be opened from within ourselves. When we pursue our objective course, they would say, we come to no end, one chain leads to another, the concatenation has no beginning and no conclusion. We now make a retreat and dig deeper and deeper down into the very foundation rock of consciousness. When we do this, as the Lankavatara says, there finally takes place a revulsion apparently within our own minds. There opens up a new vista where we never expected anything religiously or spiritually convincing. In the beginning we supposed that we could not get down deep enough to come in touch with anything transcendental.